This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. So we're diving deep today into India's landmark labor reforms. This new code, it promises some pretty sweeping changes, right? But are these changes actually beneficial for everyone? I mean, really?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The goal is to simplify things, to make a complex system easier to understand. But the devil's in the details, as they say.
Exactly. We'll be looking at the 4 codes, how they impact minimum wages, and what kind of social security net they create or don't create.
And of course, the potential downsides. Will it really empower workers, or will it just create new problems?
Let's start with the introduction. The document talks a lot about the huge unorganized sector, something like 90% of India's workforce, right? What does that mean?
Yeah, the size of that unorganized sector is a really big deal. These reforms are trying to bring millions of people under the umbrella of labor laws for the first time. And the history is important too. The document points out that, serious reform efforts were just lacking for years.
Right. The talk about codification started back in 2002, but significant action only happened much later. So what caused that delay? What do you think?
Well, there's a few things, I think. Political will, definitely. Bureaucratic inertia, that's a big one. And maybe a lack of agreement among all the different groups involved. The document suggests that the momentum from the GST reform helped push things along for labor law changes.
Interesting. The document says the government tried a consultative approach, talking to different groups and getting parliamentary approval. How well do you think that worked?
That's tough to say for sure. Consultation is good, of course. But the final result really reflects what the government wanted. So how much the different viewpoints were actually considered, that's debatable.
Okay, let's move on to the 4 codes themselves. The document says they combined 29 existing laws. What are the good and bad points of that?
The main benefit is simplification. Instead of dealing with a huge mess of laws, workers and employers have a clearer framework. But combining everything like that can also lead to problems if important details get lost along the way.
The wage code, for example, aims to guarantee minimum wages for everyone. What are the main points of that code?
It sets a minimum wage, makes sure payments are on time, and aims for equal pay for equal work. The 5-year review is important to keep the minimum wage up to date. But enforcement is a huge challenge.
The Social Security Code is also really important. It combines 9 laws to create a better social security net. What are some of its key parts?
It covers pensions, gratuity, maternity benefits, and importantly, it tries to include the unorganized sector. Creating a Social Security fund is a big step, but funding and actually making it work are big concerns.
The Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code is about workplace safety. What does it do?
It aims to improve working conditions, especially for vulnerable groups like migrant workers. Things like annual health checkups and travel allowances are good. But again, enforcement is key.
And finally, the Industrial Relations Code deals with how employers and employees get along. What's important there?
It tries to make resolving disputes easier, encourage collective bargaining, and create a more balanced system for industrial relations. Recognizing trade unions is a big part of it, but the potential impact on the right to strike needs careful thought.
The document mentions several specific reforms since 2014, like raising the gratuity limit and extending maternity leave. How important are these changes?
They're positive steps, for sure, but they're small improvements within a much bigger, more complicated system. How much they help depends on how well they're implemented.
The document talks about using technology, like the Shram Suvita portal and the Universal Account Number, or UIM. How important is technology for these reforms to succeed?
Technology is essential for making things run smoothly, increasing transparency, and making benefits easier to access. But we need to deal with digital literacy issues and the fact that infrastructure isn't great everywhere.
The document wants to replace the old Inspector Raj system with something more helpful. Is that realistic?
It's a great goal, but it requires a huge change in how things are done. Corruption and bureaucratic hurdles are still big problems.
The document keeps mentioning ease of doing business. How does that relate to worker welfare?
The idea is that a simpler regulatory environment helps both businesses and workers. But it's crucial to make sure that ease of doing business doesn't mean ignoring worker rights and protections.
The document says ESIC coverage is expanding to all districts. Why is that significant?
That's a big step towards universal health care for workers, especially in the unorganized sector. But making sure there's enough infrastructure and resources is crucial.
And the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Man Dhan Yojana provides pensions for unorganized sector workers. What are its good and bad points?
It's a vital initiative to provide Social Security to people who didn't have it before. but whether the pension amount is enough and if the scheme will last are important questions.
The document focuses a lot on the welfare of migrant workers. What are the key parts aimed at helping them?
The code addresses several key issues, like registration, travel allowances, access to ration cards, and ways to deal with complaints. Creating a national database is also important.
How effective do you think these things will be in practice?
Their success depends on strong implementation and cooperation between different state governments. Enforcement is a major challenge.
The document mentions giving workers appointment letters and mandatory annual health checkups. Why are these small details important?
These small things are crucial for making employment relationships official and ensuring basic worker rights. They contribute to a safer and more respectful work environment.
The document emphasizes better employer-employee relationships. Is that realistic, given how much conflict there often is?
It's a tough goal, but essential for sustainable development. Building trust and respect requires effort from both sides.
The Industrial Relations Code aims to improve dispute resolution. What are its main features?
It aims to speed up dispute resolution through tribunals, focusing on getting justice quickly. Setting up negotiating councils is also meant to promote collective bargaining. The document mentions the Atal Bilat Vyakti Kalyan Yojana, which helps workers who lose their jobs. How effective is it?
It's a valuable safety net, but its effectiveness depends on things like whether the financial help is enough and how easy it is to access.
The document is pretty positive, highlighting how the reforms could improve worker welfare and boost economic growth. What's your overall view? The reforms are a significant attempt to deal with long-standing problems in India's labor market. But their success depends on effective implementation, strong enforcement, and dealing with potential unintended consequences.
What are some key unanswered questions or challenges?
Enforcement is a major concern. The government's ability to monitor compliance and deal with violations is crucial. The impact on informal sector workers, especially the most vulnerable, needs close monitoring. The long-term adequacy of Social Security provisions also needs assessment. And finally, the potential impact on employment needs more study.
The document says state governments can modify the codes. What does that mean?
That flexibility allows for adaptation to local situations, but it also risks creating inconsistencies across states, which could undermine the goal of a unified national framework.
So this discussion has shown just how complex and ambitious India's new labor code is. It has a lot of promise, but its success depends on careful implementation and ongoing monitoring. Thank you for your insights.
Hey there, fellow knowledge seekers. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're tackling a topic that's been making some serious waves. India's new labor codes. We're talking a complete reshaping of how work happens for a workforce. Get this.
Yeah.
Of over 500 million people.
It's a massive undertaking for sure, a complete transformation of the country's labor landscape.
And it's not just tweaking a few things here and there.
Nope. India went all in and consolidated 29 existing labor laws into just 4 comprehensive codes. The goal, making things clearer, more efficient, cutting through the red tape for both businesses and workers.
So 4 codes to rule them all, huh?
Yeah.
We've got the Code on Wages, the Industrial Relations Code, the Code on Social Security, and this one's a mouthful, the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code. Where do we even begin with something this massive?
Well, think of it this way. Each code focuses on a specific area, but they all work together, interconnected. It's like they're weaving together a more modern and inclusive labor framework for India.
Okay, I like that, weaving it all together.
So maybe a good starting point is the Code on Wages, which came out in 2019. This one's really the foundation, the bedrock of fair labor practices.
Right, fair pay, that's got to be the starting point. This code, it replaces 4 old laws, right?
Exactly. It covers everything from minimum wages to how bonuses are calculated and even how deductions from paychecks are handled.
It feels like this one has the potential to really make a difference in people's lives, directly.
Absolutely, 100%. And one of the biggest changes, the introduction of floor wages.
Floor wages, okay, break that down for me.
Think of it like a minimum wage, a baseline, but it applies across the entire country. It's a safety net, ensures that no matter what state you're in, workers have at least this basic level of income.
So a national minimum wage, that's a big deal, right? Does that mean everyone, no matter what job they do, earns at least this floor wage?
Yeah. Well, not quite that straightforward. Think of it more like a minimum wage. The floor wage sets the national standard, but states, they still have the power to set their own minimum wages. But, and here's the key, those state-specific minimum wages. They can't go lower than the floor wage.
Ah, clever. So it takes into account those regional variations, the cost of living and all that, but still ensures a basic level of protection.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But how do they actually decide what these wages should be? It can't just be some random number, right?
You're absolutely right. There's a methodology behind it. The code, it lays out specific factors they have to consider when setting these minimum wages.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, things like the cost of living in different areas, obviously, but also the type of work, the skill level required, and even the overall economic conditions.
Okay, so it's not just pulled out of thin air. There's a thought process behind it. But who actually gets to decide all this? Is it just the government calling the shots?
Not exactly. It's actually more of a collaborative effort. The code mandates the creation of these advisory boards at both the central and state levels.
Advisory boards, interesting.
Yeah, and the cool part is these boards include people from trade unions, employer organizations, and even independent experts.
So everyone gets a seat at the table, huh?
Right. It's designed to make sure everyone has a voice, that all perspectives are considered.
That's a really good system, very inclusive. It seems like this code on wages, it's really trying to strike a balance, make sure things are fair. But it's not just about setting a minimum wage, it's also about making sure people get paid, like actually get the money they're owed, right?
Absolutely. One of the key things this code stresses is that wages need to be paid on time. And not just whenever, it specifies the form of payment too.
Oh, like no more funny business with those, shady paycheck practices.
Right. It has to be either cash or direct bank transfer, clean and transparent.
I like that. No more loopholes. And what about those deductions everyone hates, the ones that take a chunk out of your paycheck? Does the code address that?
You bet it does. It sets clear guidelines on what deductions are allowed and which ones are a no-go. Things like fines or deductions for being absent, those are okay, but within limits, so workers are protected.
So no more deducting whatever you feel like from someone's hard-earned money.
Exactly. It's about ensuring fairness on both sides, for both workers and employers.
It's really good to see this code really trying to cover all the bases. Now, let's move on to another piece of this massive puzzle. The Industrial Relations Code, the 2021. This one seems like it could really shake things up.
It definitely has that potential. This code dives deep into the heart of the worker-employer relationship. We're talking about everything from how trade unions function to the mechanisms for resolving disputes, even strikes and lockouts.
Okay, lots to unpack there.
It's India's attempt to modernize these dynamics, the ones that can get really complex and sometimes, let's face it, pretty contentious.
Right, lots of emotions involved when it comes to work. So let's start with trade unions. How does this code change things for workers who want to organize, have that collective voice?
One of the most noticeable changes is the requirement for unions to have a larger membership base to be officially registered. And this applies across the board, both in the organized and unorganized sectors.
So no more tiny unions with just a handful of members.
It's pushing for stronger, more representative unions. You got it. There are specific thresholds. They vary depending on the size of the workforce in that specific industry or, that particular company. But the idea is that for a union to be officially recognized, it needs to show it has broader support.
So it's giving them more weight, more legitimacy when they're at the bargaining table.
Exactly. It elevates their position, shows they genuinely represent the workers.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about those situations where things get a little, let's say, heated between workers and employers? How does the code handle those disputes, when things go sideways?
Well, it keeps the existing 3-tier system for resolving disputes.
3 tiers?
Yeah, so you have conciliation, arbitration, and then finally adjudication. It's basically a step-by-step approach, starting with the least formal method and escalating if they can't reach a resolution.
So start by talking it out, and then if that doesn't work, bring in the big guns.
Exactly. Conciliation is first. That's where a neutral third party comes in and tries to help both sides find some common ground.
Like a mediator.
Exactly. But if that doesn't work, then you move on to arbitration. In arbitration, a neutral arbitrator hears both sides of the story and then makes a decision that everyone has to follow.
So it gets a bit more serious there.
And then, if all else fails, there's adjudication. That means taking the dispute to a labor court or tribunal, the legal route.
It sounds like they built in a system that gives everyone a fair shot at resolving things before it gets too, messy.
That's the goal, to have a system that encourages resolution.
But sometimes things do get messy, right? What about strikes and lockouts? Those can get pretty disruptive, can't they?
You're right, those are definitely sensitive issues. The code, it does recognize the right of workers to strike, but it also sets some rules, some guidelines.
Guidelines are good, helps keep things from getting out of hand.
Right, like there are requirements for giving notice before a strike can happen. And they also need to hold a secret ballot amongst the union members.
So it's not just a few people calling the shots, everyone gets a say.
Exactly. It ensures that there's genuine support for the strike, that it's what the workers actually want.
So it's all about that balance again, right? Protecting the right to strike, but also trying to keep things from getting too disruptive.
Precisely. And the same principle applies to lockouts.
Lockouts. Remind me what those are again.
That's when the employer shuts down operations, kind of the opposite of a strike. The code, it outlines when a lockout can happen, what justifies it, and employers have to follow a specific procedure.
So it can't just be a knee-jerk reaction. They have to have a valid reason.
Exactly.
It sounds like the whole point of this industrial relations code is to create a more level playing field, encouraging dialogue, fairness, working things out.
I think that sums it up perfectly.
But let's shift gears for a minute. Let's talk about something that often gets overlooked in these conversations about labor laws. The well-being of the workers. Not just their wages, but their overall well-being, That's where the code on Social Security comes in, right?
Absolutely. This code, it's a real game changer, especially for folks working in the gig economy. It's huge for them. It pulls together 9 existing laws and, get this, it expands Social Security coverage to workers who were basically left out before.
So who are we talking about specifically?
We're talking about gig workers, people working on those online platforms, and folks in the unorganized sector, a massive part of India's workforce.
This is huge. For the first time, these workers are getting that safety net, that support system, when they need it most.
Right. It's about recognizing the contributions of all workers, regardless of their, official employment status. It's saying, hey, you matter, and we're going to make sure you're taken care of.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So what kind of benefits are we talking about?
It's a pretty comprehensive package. We're talking life and disability cover, health and maternity benefits, even provisions for old age protection.
Wow, it's like they thought of everything. So India is really trying to create a more inclusive social safety net. That's amazing. But how are they going to actually reach all these workers, especially those in the informal economy? They're not exactly easy to track, are they?
That's where technology comes in. This code, it uses Aadhaar, India's biometric identification system.
Aadhaar, yeah, I've heard of that.
It helps streamline enrollment and prevents fraud, make sure the benefits actually reach the people who need them.
That's smart, using tech to bridge that gap. But managing a system this large and complex? That can't be easy. Who's in charge of making sure everything runs smoothly?
So they've set up different boards at various levels, central, state, even building worker levels. These boards are responsible for actually implementing and managing the Social Security schemes, making sure they work.
Okay, so a multi-layered approach makes sense. It's a massive undertaking, but the potential impact is huge. Now let's turn our attention to the final code, the one with the super long name, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, 2020. What's the main idea behind this one?
This one's all about ensuring that workplaces are safe, healthy, good places for people to work. They consolidated 13 existing laws into this one, trying to create a stronger system for protecting workers.
So it's about more than just preventing, accidents on the job.
Right. It takes a broader view, thinking about the overall well-being of the worker.
That's a good thing, thinking holistically.
It covers everything from working hours and rest breaks to making sure there's proper ventilation and sanitation in the workplace.
So it's about the physical environment, making sure it's up to par.
But also the policies and practices, how the work is structured.
Okay, so it's looking at the whole picture. What about specific hazards, like those involving chemicals or machinery?
Oh, it covers those too. Employers are required to do risk assessments, identify potential hazards, and then, importantly, put measures in place to prevent them.
So it's about being proactive, not just waiting for something bad to happen.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of safety, thinking ahead.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
But how do they make sure employers actually take all these precautions seriously?
Well, for one, the code mandates that certain workplaces have safety officers. They also have to form safety committees that include both workers and management.
So everyone has a voice, Both sides are represented.
Right. It's about collaboration, working together to create a safer work environment.
I'm sensing a theme here, this idea of collaboration. It seems like it's woven into all these codes. It's not just about telling employers what to do, but working together.
Absolutely. And it's not just about physical safety either. This code recognizes that mental well-being is important too.
That's great. Mental health is finally getting the attention it deserves.
It encourages employers to create a supportive work environment and take steps to prevent things like stress and burnout.
It's about creating a workplace culture that values worker health in every aspect.
Exactly. And honestly, that's good for everyone. Healthy and happy workers are more productive, more engaged. It benefits the business too.
Absolutely. It's a win-win. So we've covered a lot of ground here. These 4 codes are massive, complex, far-reaching. But you know what always intrigues me?
What's that?
The unexpected consequences. What are some of the things that might happen as a result of these changes that aren't, immediately obvious?
You're talking about the ripple effects, the unintended consequences.
Exactly. Any thoughts on that?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is foreign investment. A lot of foreign companies have been kind of hesitant to really invest heavily in India.
Because of the labor laws?
Exactly. They were complex, often outdated. It just made things, unpredictable.
Makes sense. Businesses like predictability.
Right. So these new codes, by simplifying things, making the labor market more transparent, they could make India a much more appealing place for foreign companies to put their money.
So a more stable and transparent regulatory environment that's attractive to businesses. Got it. What about the impact on the workers themselves? Do you think these codes will actually lead to better working conditions? Higher quality of life for the people on the ground?
That's the hope, the ultimate goal, right? But we got to remember these codes are brand new, just came into effect. It's going to take time to see how they're implemented, what the long-term effects are, play out in the real world.
It's not an overnight fix, right?
Exactly. And then there's the whole enforcement piece we talked about earlier.
Right. Good laws are only as good as their enforcement.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So even with the best intentions, the success of these codes really depends on how effectively they're put into action.
100%. It's all about execution.
It's going to be fascinating to watch this unfold, see how it all plays out.
It really is a massive social and economic experiment in a way.
Absolutely. Speaking of fascinating, there's one aspect of the code on Social Security that really caught my eye. The whole concept of aggregators, in the context of gig workers.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part. It's all about figuring out how to extend Social Security to those gig workers who operate through those digital platforms.
Right, like your ride-hailing apps, your food delivery services, those online marketplaces, all that.
Exactly.
These platforms, they connect workers with customers, but they don't technically employ them directly, right?
It's more like they're independent contractors. That's the tricky part.
So how does the code address that unique dynamic?
So it recognizes that these platforms, they play a big role in today's economy. So they created a new category, they call it the aggregator. And the code lays out specific responsibilities for these platforms, things they have to do, all geared toward ensuring Social Security for the workers using their platform.
Okay, so what are they actually required to do? Are these platforms basically being treated as employers?
Well, one of the key things is they have to contribute to a Social Security fund for those gig workers. These contributions, they're used to provide things like life and disability cover, health insurance, that safety net.
So it's kind of like how traditional employers contribute to Social Security for their employees.
Yeah, very similar in principle. The goal is to level the playing field, make sure that all workers have access to that basic level of Social Security.
It's recognizing that work is changing and the system needs to adapt, right?
Exactly. Can't just stick with the old ways when the way we work is changing so rapidly.
It's a pretty innovative approach. I'm curious to see how it plays out in practice. Okay, let's switch gears again, talk about something that's often overshadowed in these labor law discussions. Occupational health, the health of the workers. The Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code, it dedicates a whole chapter to this, right?
It does. That's a big deal. Traditional workplace safety regulations, they were mainly focused on preventing accidents, injuries, those obvious physical dangers.
Right, keep people from getting hurt on the job.
But this code, it goes a step further. It says occupational health. That's important too.
It's about protecting workers' overall well-being, not just preventing accidents, right?
Exactly. It's a more holistic view, a broader understanding of what it means to be safe at work.
Okay, so what does the code actually say about occupational health? Give me the highlights. What are some of the key things in there.
Well, it goes beyond just the basics, like hygiene and sanitation. Employers now, they have to do health risk assessments, figure out what potential health hazards exist in their workplaces, and then, crucially, take steps to control and prevent those hazards.
So again, it's about being proactive, not reactive.
You got it. Think ahead, anticipate problems, put measures in place to stop them from happening in the first place.
Much better than trying to fix things after the fact.
Right. Prevention is key. Another big piece of this is information and training. The code says employers have to educate their workers about occupational health risks, what to watch out for, and they have to provide training on preventive measures.
So workers need to know what they're dealing with, how to protect themselves.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. Right. Empowering workers to stay safe.
Absolutely.
There are also provisions for regular health checkups for workers who are exposed to certain types of hazards. Catching things early, that's the goal.
It's all about prevention, early detection, making worker health a priority.
I think that sums it up perfectly.
It seems like this code is really taking a comprehensive approach to workplace health and safety.
It really is. It's a big step forward.
It's reflecting a growing awareness that worker well-being is about more than just physical safety.
Right. It's about mental and emotional health, too, that whole picture.
That's so important, especially these days. Workplace stress, burnout, mental health issues, these are huge problems.
Huge. And they're becoming more and more prevalent. It's something we can't ignore.
Exactly.
And this code, it encourages employers to think about this, to create a supportive work environment. Things like access to counseling services or even flexible work arrangements. These can make a big difference.
It's about shifting the workplace culture, making worker health a core value.
Precisely. And you know what? That benefits everyone. Healthy, happy workers, they're more productive, more engaged. That's good for the company too.
It's that win-win again. So India's really trying to create this more holistic, more modern approach to labor relations with these new codes.
Absolutely. It's a win-win for everyone.
So it seems like India's really trying to create this more holistic and modern approach to labor relations with these new codes. But you know what always intrigues me? The unexpected consequences.
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
What are some of the things that might happen as a result of these changes? Things that aren't immediately obvious. The ripple effects.
The unintended consequences. Those can be the most interesting.
Exactly. Any thoughts on that?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is foreign investment.
Really? Foreign investment?
Yeah, think about it. A lot of foreign companies have been hesitant to really invest heavily in India in the past.
Because of the labor laws.
Yep, they were complex, often outdated. It just made things unpredictable for businesses.
Businesses don't like uncertainty, that's for sure.
Right. So these new codes, by simplifying things, making the labor market more transparent, they could make India a much more appealing place for foreign investment.
Makes sense. A more stable and transparent regulatory environment that's attractive to businesses. What about the impact on the workers themselves? Do you think these codes will actually lead to better working conditions, a higher quality of life for Indian workers?
Well, that's the goal, the hope, right? That these changes ultimately benefit the workers. But we have to remember, these codes are brand new. They just came into effect.
It's too early to tell what the long-term impact will be.
Exactly. It's going to take time to see how they're implemented, how they actually play out in the real world.
So we'll have to wait and see.
And there's also the whole question of enforcement. We talked about that earlier. Having good laws on paper is one thing, but making sure they're actually enforced, that's another challenge altogether.
Right. Enforcement is key.
Couldn't agree more.
So even with the best intentions, the success of these codes really hinges on how effectively they're put into practice.
100%. It all comes down to execution.
It's going to be fascinating to watch this unfold, to see how it all plays out in the coming years.
It really is. It's a massive social and economic experiment, in a way, and the whole world's watching.
Absolutely. Well, folks, there you have it, our deep dive into India's new labor codes. We covered a lot of ground today, from minimum wages to social security for gig workers, occupational health, the whole 9 yards.
We explored how India is reshaping its labor landscape, trying to create a system that's more modern, more equitable, more efficient.
And while it's still early days, the potential impact of these changes is huge. It's a story that's still being written, and we'll be following it closely in the years to come.
Definitely one to keep an eye on. There's a lot more to learn and discover as this all unfolds.
Absolutely. And as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to stay curious, stay engaged, and keep exploring the ever-changing world around us. Until next time, happy diving.
This conversation is powered by Google Illuminate. Check out illuminate.google.com for more. So we're diving deep into the Code on Wages 2019, a really complex piece of legislation. Are you ready to unravel its intricacies?
Absolutely. This act has significant implications for workers' rights and employer responsibilities, across India.
Yeah, it's a dense document, but we'll break it down piece by piece. Let's start with the definitions. Some are surprisingly specific.
Indeed. The definition of wages, for instance, is crucial and excludes several components many might assume are included.
Right, and the appropriate government distinction between central and state levels adds another layer of complexity. Okay, Chapter 1, Preliminary, establish